courtroom felt colder than it should have. Not because of the air, but because of the quiet that settled in the room like a heavy blanket. People filled the wooden benches, some out of duty, some out of curiosity. Papers rustled. Shoes scraped softly against the floor. A clock on the wall ticked loud enough to be noticed. Everyone waited. At one table sat the man. He wore a clean suit and kept his back straight. He leaned toward his lawyer now and then, whispering, nodding, confident. He had prepared for this day. He had rehearsed answers and practiced calm expressions in the mirror. From where he sat, this case looked simple. He believed the facts were on his side, and facts, he thought, always win. Across the room sat the woman. She sat alone. No family behind her. No friend leaning close to offer comfort. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her eyes stayed down most of the time, fixed on the table in front of her. She wore plain clothes, nothing that stood out. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid either. She looked tired, in a way that comes from long nights and longer years. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The sound of chairs moving echoed briefly, then faded. The judge took his seat and looked around the room. He had seen many cases like this. Arguments between two people who once promised each other everything. Promises broken, trust worn thin, memories turned into weapons. Still, something about this room felt different. The case began as expected. The lawyer spoke first, confident and clear. He laid out dates, numbers, and events in neat order. He spoke about missed responsibilities, careless choices, and silence that, in his view, meant avoidance. As he spoke, some people in the room glanced toward the woman, waiting for a reaction. There was none. She did not shake her head. She did not sigh or roll her eyes. She simply sat there, still and quiet, as if the words were passing over her like distant noise. The lawyer continued, pointing to documents, emphasizing moments from the past. To him, the story was clean and easy to understand. The judge listened closely, making notes now and then. He asked a few routine questions. The man answered without hesitation. His voice was steady. He had answers ready for everything. It was clear he had been waiting for the chance to speak. When the judge turned toward the woman and asked a basic question, she responded briefly. Her voice was low but clear. She gave only what was required, no more. When asked if she understood the claims made against her, she said yes. Nothing else. Some people shifted in their seats. A woman in the back whispered to the person beside her. A quiet judgment formed in the air, the kind that grows when silence fills the space where explanation is expected. To many, it looked like she had nothing to say because she had nothing to defend. The hearing moved on. More details were shared. Timelines were explained. Small moments from the marriage were brought up and placed under a harsh light. The lawyer spoke of responsibility and fairness, repeating the same points in different ways. The man nodded along, occasionally glancing toward the woman with a look that mixed relief and frustration. Relief because she stayed silent. Frustration because he wanted her to react. But she did not. Her face remained calm. Her breathing stayed even. Only once did she press her lips together slightly, as if holding back words that had learned, over time, to stay hidden. The judge noticed. He had watched many people sit in that chair. Some cried. Some argued. Some interrupted every sentence spoken against them. Silence was rare. This kind of silence was even rarer. It was not empty. It was careful. He looked at her again. Her posture was straight, but not tense. Her eyes stayed low, but not in shame. It looked more like focus, like she was keeping herself steady by not looking around. The court took a short pause. People stood, stretched, whispered. The woman stayed seated. She did not reach for her phone. She did not speak to anyone. She simply closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. In that brief moment, memories passed through her mind. Not in clear pictures, but in feelings. Long evenings waiting for someone who said they would be home early. Quiet dinners eaten alone. Words swallowed to keep peace. Promises that slowly changed shape until they meant nothing at all. She had learned, long before this courtroom, that speaking did not always bring understanding. Sometimes it brought more blame. Sometimes it brought nothing. Silence had become a shield, not a weakness. The session resumed. The judge asked another question, then another. Each time, the woman answered simply and carefully. She never corrected small details even when they were wrong. She never interrupted, even when something said did not match her memory. To the people watching, it felt strange. Why would someone let their story be told by others? Why sit there and accept a version of life that felt incomplete? But to her, this was not about winning an argument. It was about surviving another telling of a past she had already lived through once. The man's lawyer finished speaking and sat back with a satisfied look. The case, at least from his side, felt complete. He believed the picture was clear. The judge leaned back slightly and looked over his notes. He looked at the man, then at the woman. He did not speak right away. The silence returned, thicker than before. The woman felt her heart beat a little faster. Not from fear, but from the weight of waiting. She had carried this weight for years. Waiting for someone to notice what was missing. Waiting for a question that was not about money or dates or mistakes on paper. The judge cleared his throat. Before moving on, he said, "I want to understand something." Everyone leaned in, expecting another routine question. The woman lifted her eyes slightly, not fully, just enough to show she was listening. The room held its breath. And in that moment, before the unexpected question was asked, it was clear that this case was not as simple as it first appeared. The silence that had filled the courtroom was not empty after all. It was full of things no one had yet thought to ask. When the hearing continued, the room felt different. The earlier confidence had softened into something heavier. People were no longer shifting in their seats as much. They were listening more carefully now, even if they didn't yet know why. The judge asked the next witness to speak. It was someone who had known the couple during the later years of the marriage. The witness spoke politely, choosing words carefully, but the message stayed the same. The marriage, according to them, looked distant. The woman was described as quiet, withdrawn, and often absent in conversations. The man was described as frustrated, trying, and ignored. As the words filled the room, the woman kept her eyes on the table. She had heard these descriptions before. They followed her everywhere. Like a shadow she could never step away from. Quiet became cold. Tired became careless. Silence became guilt. The judge thanked the witness and asked a few questions. None of them changed the overall picture being painted. The witness stepped down. Another person was called. Then another. Each one added a small brushstroke to the same image. A woman who did not speak. A marriage that slowly broke because of it. From the benches, a few people nodded along. It all sounded reasonable. When someone does not talk, others fill the space for them. The man sat straighter now. His confidence returned little by little. Every quiet moment from the woman felt, to him, like confirmation. He glanced at her more often now, not with anger, but with something closer to relief. As if her silence proved that the past could finally be placed neatly into boxes and labeled. The judge called for a short break again. This time, the woman stood and walked slowly toward the window at the side of the room. She did not look outside. She just stood there, hands folded, breathing in and out, steadying herself. She remembered moments that never made it into court files. Small things that seemed too ordinary to matter. How she used to speak up at first. How she tried to explain what she felt. How every explanation turned into an argument. Every concern turned into blame. Over time, words became something she used less. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she learned they changed nothing. When the break ended, she returned to her seat. The judge looked at her again, this time longer. He did not interrupt the process, but his attention stayed fixed on her more than before. The lawyer continued. He spoke about decisions made during the marriage. About responsibilities that were not met. About moments where the woman chose silence instead of action. He framed it as a pattern. A choice. The woman felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not panic. Not anger. Just the quiet weight of being misunderstood. When it was her turn to respond, she stood briefly, answered a few questions, then sat again. Her answers were short but honest. Yes. No. I don't recall. That is not how I remember it. The lawyer pressed a little harder. Asked why she never raised concerns earlier. Asked why she never spoke up when things were falling apart. She paused before answering. The room leaned in. She said, "I didn't think anyone was listening." It was a simple sentence. No emotion attached. No explanation added. Still, it landed heavier than expected. The lawyer moved on quickly, not wanting to open a door he could not control. The judge wrote something down. As the hearing went on, small cracks began to appear in the story everyone thought they understood. Dates that did not fully line up. Decisions that were described as mutual but seemed one-sided when looked at closely. Moments where silence was assumed, but proof of it was thin. The judge asked the man a few more questions now. His answers were still confident, but they slowed slightly. He hesitated once, then corrected himself. It was minor, but noticeable. The woman noticed too. She remained quiet, but her posture shifted just a little. Not in victory, more like readiness. The judge asked both sides to clarify a specific event from late in the marriage. It was mentioned briefly earlier, almost in passing. A night when an important decision was made without full agreement. The lawyer explained it quickly, brushing past it as unavoidable. The woman's hands tightened together for a moment. She did not speak, but the judge noticed again. He looked up and asked the lawyer to slow down. He asked for more detail. Why was that decision made so suddenly? Who suggested it? Who agreed to it? The answers came, but they felt incomplete. The judge turned toward the woman. He did not ask her to speak yet. He simply observed her reaction. Her eyes were no longer fixed on the table. They were focused now, sharp, alert. People in the room sensed the shift. Something was changing, even if no one could say what. The judge called for one last witness before ending the session for the day. This witness spoke about the woman's behavior outside the marriage. At work, in daily life, they described her as reliable, thoughtful, and calm. Someone who listened more than she spoke, but always followed through. The contrast was clear. The judge leaned back again, folding his hands. He thanked the witness and dismissed them. The room grew quiet once more. The woman felt a strange calm settle over her. Not because things were going her way, but because, for the first time, the silence felt noticed. Not judged. Not ignored. Just noticed. The judge announced that the court would pause and resume later. People stood, gathered their things, and began whispering again. Opinions shifted quietly from one person to another. The man left the table first, speaking in low tones with his lawyer. His earlier confidence was still there, but it no longer filled the room the way it had before. The woman stayed behind for a moment. She looked at the empty chair across from her, at the space where so many words had been spoken about her, without her. She took a slow breath and stood. As she walked toward the exit, the judge watched her go. He did not call her back. He did not ask anything yet. But in his mind a question was forming. Not about numbers. Not about dates. About silence. And why someone would hold onto it for so long. When the court resumed, the room felt heavier than before. It was the kind of weight that settles when people sense that something important is about to happen. The benches filled again, slower this time. Voices were lower. Even the shuffling of papers sounded careful. The woman returned to her seat and placed her hands on the table the same way she always did. Calm on the outside, steady breathing. But inside, she felt alert. Not nervous. Aware. The judge entered and took his seat. He did not begin right away. He looked over his notes, then scanned the room once more. His eyes stopped on the woman for a brief moment, then moved on. The lawyer stood and began where he left off. He repeated some points, adding a few details he thought would strengthen his case. He spoke about responsibility again, about how silence over time becomes a choice, about how choices have consequences. The woman listened. She had heard these words before in different rooms spoken by different people. Each time they landed the same way, heavy but familiar. The judge let the lawyer finish, then raised his hand slightly. He said he had a question. The room straightened, but instead of asking about money or schedules or documents, the judge asked about a moment mentioned earlier. A night near the end of the marriage. A decision made quickly. A choice that changed the direction of things. The lawyer answered first, explaining it as necessary and mutual. He spoke smoothly, as if the matter had already been settled. The judge nodded, then turned toward the woman. He asked her if she remembered that night. She did. For a second, she considered answering the same way she always had. Short, careful, safe. But something about the question felt different. It was not an accusation. It was not rushed. She said yes. The judge asked her what she remembered. The room went quiet. She took a breath. It was slow, steady. When she spoke, her voice was calm. Not loud. Not shaking. She said she remembered sitting at the table late in the evening. She remembered being tired. She remembered trying to explain that she wasn't ready. That she needed time. She remembered being told it was already decided. That it was better this way. That talking more would only make things worse. No one interrupted her. She explained that she stopped speaking that night. Not because she agreed, but because she realized her words no longer mattered in the room they were in. The judge listened closely. He did not write anything down. He just listened. The lawyer stood quickly, objecting to the direction of the answer. The judge allowed the objection, but asked the woman to continue, keeping it brief. She nodded and did. She said her silence did not begin in court. It began years before, in small moments when speaking led nowhere, in times when explaining turned into defending. Over time, silence felt like the only way to keep things from breaking further. The man shifted in his seat. The judge asked the woman why she never said any of this before. She looked up fully now, not at the man, at the judge. She said because no one had ever asked her that way. The room felt still. The judge asked a few follow-up questions. Simple ones. About how decisions were made. About how often she felt heard. About whether silence was ever mistaken for agreement. Her answers were clear, honest, sometimes uncomfortable. She said silence is often misunderstood. People assume it means peace when it really means exhaustion. The man's lawyer tried to regain control, asking sharper questions. Why didn't she leave sooner? Why didn't she document these concerns? Why wait until now? She answered without anger. She said leaving is not always simple. That not everything leaves a mark on paper. That sometimes people survive by staying quiet until they are strong enough to speak. The judge raised his hand again, signaling the lawyer to stop. He looked at the woman and asked one last question. He asked if she believed her silence had been used against her. She paused. Then she said yes. She explained that silence can be shaped by others into whatever story suits them. That once she stopped correcting people, they filled in the gaps themselves. The judge nodded slowly. The man was asked to respond. His answers came slower now. He said he believed silence meant acceptance. That if something was truly wrong, it would have been said. The judge asked him if he ever asked why she stopped speaking. There was a pause. He said no. That pause lingered. The judge leaned back, hands folded. He looked between them, not as opponents, but as two people who once shared a life and learned very different lessons from it. He announced another short pause. As people stood, whispers spread quickly. The story no longer felt simple. Opinions shifted again. The woman remained seated, breathing evenly. She felt lighter, not because everything was resolved, but because something long held had finally been placed in the open. When the court prepared to resume, the judge spoke again. He said the case would continue, but he would be considering what had been shared carefully. He reminded everyone that silence does not always mean agreement, and that understanding often begins with the right question. The woman stood as the session ended. She did not smile. She did not look relieved. But for the first time she felt seen. And the courtroom knew that the silence which once worked against her had now changed the direction of everything. When the court resumed again, the energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer about proving who was right. It was about understanding what had been missed. People sat forward now. Even those who had come only out of curiosity sensed that the story had layers they hadn't seen before. The woman returned to her seat with the same quiet presence, but something about her felt steadier. She was not bracing herself anymore. She was simply present. Her hands rested on the table, relaxed. Her eyes were open and alert. The judge began by asking both sides to clarify certain details from earlier statements. He moved slowly, carefully, as if stepping through fragile ground. He asked about patterns rather than single events, about how decisions were usually made, about how disagreements were handled when they came up. The man answered first. He said decisions were shared, that discussions happened, that silence often followed, which he took as agreement. He spoke without raising his voice, but there was tension beneath his words now. He was no longer certain how his answers would land. The judge nodded, then turned to the woman. He asked her how decisions usually ended. She answered honestly. She said discussions often ended when she stopped pushing. Not because the issue was resolved, but because continuing felt pointless. She said she learned to choose calm over conflict. Over time, that choice turned into habit. The judge asked whether she ever felt safe disagreeing. She paused before answering, not to avoid the question but to choose her words carefully. She said safe might not be the right word. She said disagreement often led to long arguments that solved nothing. So she learned to stay quiet, hoping peace would follow. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. The courtroom stayed silent as her words settled. The judge asked the man if he remembered these moments the same way. He hesitated. He said he remembered arguments but not the reasons behind the silence. He admitted he assumed things would be said if they mattered enough. The judge asked him if he ever checked whether silence meant agreement or surrender. The man did not answer right away. He finally said he didn't think to ask. That answer hung in the air. The judge moved on to practical matters next. He reviewed records, messages, and timelines again, this time through a different lens. Some moments that once seemed clear now looked uncertain. Some gaps felt larger. He asked the woman about a period when she appeared distant. She explained she was dealing with personal strain, trying to keep daily life stable while feeling unheard at home. She said she didn't want to burden others with problems. She felt she should be able to handle herself. The judge listened without interrupting. He asked the man if he noticed this change at the time. The man said he noticed distance, but believed it was lack of interest. The judge nodded slowly. As the questioning continued, the courtroom mood softened. It was no longer sharp or confrontational. It felt reflective. Even the lawyer adjusted his tone, choosing words more carefully. The woman answered questions calmly. She did not accuse. She did not raise her voice. She spoke as someone explaining a long journey rather than retelling a fight. Her words were simple but they carried weight. At one point, the judge asked her what she hoped for now. She said she wanted fairness. Not punishment. Not praise. Just fairness. She said she wanted the truth to be seen clearly, without noise. The judge wrote something down. The man was asked the same question. He said he wanted closure. He wanted the past to stop following him. The judge acknowledged both answers. As the session continued, it became clear that this case was no longer about winning. It was about correcting a picture that had been drawn too quickly. The judge asked both sides to submit additional information, not to accuse, but to clarify. The woman nodded. She was willing. The man nodded too, though more slowly. When the judge announced another pause, people rose quietly. There was no loud chatter this time. Conversations were hushed, thoughtful. The woman remained seated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She felt tired, but not drained. Speaking had not taken as much from her as she once feared. It felt different when someone was truly listening. As she stood to leave, the judge looked at her again. His expression was neutral but attentive. He did not speak, but the acknowledgement was there. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter. People passed by, some glancing at her, some avoiding eye contact. She didn't mind either way. She found a quiet spot near a window and stood there for a moment. She thought about how silence had shaped her life, how it had protected her at times, how it had also hidden her. She realized that speaking now did not erase the past. It didn't fix everything, but it changed how the past was understood. And that mattered. When the court session resumed briefly to set the next steps, the judge spoke clearly. He said the case required careful consideration. He reminded everyone that absence of words does not equal absence of truth. The woman listened, feeling steady. The man listened too, his expression unreadable. As the day ended, the woman left the building quietly. The air outside felt cooler. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. For the first time in a long while, she felt that her story was no longer trapped inside her. It was out there now, not perfect, not complete, but real. And whatever decision came next, she knew one thing for certain. Her silence no longer spoke for her. The final day of the hearing arrived with a quiet tension that felt different from the earlier sessions. There were fewer people in the courtroom, but the energy was dense. Everyone present seemed aware that the case had shifted from arguments and blame to understanding and clarity. The woman entered and took her seat calmly. Her hands rested lightly on the table, her eyes alert. She did not look around, did not speak to anyone. She had learned that her presence alone carried weight. The man sat across from her. His posture was firm, but there was a subtle uncertainty that had not been there before. The earlier confidence was now tempered with reflection. He glanced at her, then back at the judge, as if searching for reassurance. The judge began by summarizing the previous sessions. He acknowledged that silence does not always mean consent and that the story of any relationship has multiple layers. He emphasized that fairness and understanding required looking beyond the obvious. The woman listened carefully. She did not interrupt, but she felt the weight of years of silence pressing gently, like a tide that had finally come in. The lawyer spoke first, recapping facts and timelines, but his words seemed less forceful now. The room no longer reacted the way it had on the first day. The details were important, but they were no longer the only focus. The judge asked a series of questions to clarify the woman's earlier statements. He asked about her decisions, her reasoning, her experience of the marriage, and the moments she had remained silent. Her answers were calm and steady. She did not offer more than asked, but each word was precise, carrying clarity and honesty. He asked the man the same questions. He answered carefully, but pauses came where they had not before. He admitted assumptions he had made about her silence. He spoke about his own misunderstandings and how he now recognized that silence could be a signal of many things, not just acceptance. The judge nodded slowly. He asked both of them to reflect on what they had learned about communication, understanding, and patience. The courtroom listened quietly. No one spoke out of turn. The weight of these reflections was heavier than any argument or claim. The woman said that silence had protected her in ways words could not. It had allowed her to endure difficult moments without escalating conflict. But it had also made her story invisible. Speaking now, she felt a strange relief. Not because she expected judgment to shift entirely, but because truth had a chance to be seen. The man acknowledged that he had misunderstood her silence for years. He admitted that he assumed agreement where there was none, and that he had not fully understood her perspective. He did not offer excuses, only recognition. The judge asked a few more questions to ensure clarity. The answers given revealed patterns that had been invisible before. It became clear that neither side had been malicious. Both had acted within the limits of their understanding, yet the consequences had been profound. Witnesses called by both sides were asked only to clarify facts, not to judge. Their testimonies reinforced that misunderstandings were natural when communication failed, but they could also be corrected when honesty and attention were applied. Each testimony added to the overall picture, filling in gaps without creating conflict. The judge then spoke directly to both the man and the woman. He said that decisions must be guided by fairness and reality, not assumptions. He emphasized that understanding another person's silence is often more important than arguing over actions taken years ago. The woman felt a sense of closure she had not expected. Not because all questions were answered, but because the room now held space for her truth. Her perspective, once invisible, had been heard. She understood that acknowledgement was different from agreement, but it was enough to feel recognized. The man's expression softened. He had arrived expecting to defend his position and prove a point. Instead, he found himself listening and reflecting. The confidence he carried on the first day had shifted into humility and awareness. He realized that understanding required patience and empathy, not proof and argument. The judge called for final statements. The woman spoke first, briefly, about her desire for fairness and her hope that both could move forward without lingering resentment. Her words were simple but impactful. She did not speak of blame, only of clarity. The man spoke next. He acknowledged the lessons he had learned and expressed a wish for closure and understanding. He did not attempt to dominate the narrative. He recognized the value of listening over speaking. The judge thanked both parties and emphasized that the ruling would reflect fairness, not simply the louder voice or the more confident claims. He reminded everyone that true understanding often comes from careful attention to what is not immediately visible. The hearing concluded. People began leaving the courtroom quietly. Some whispered observations, others remained thoughtful and silent. The atmosphere was one of reflection rather than tension. It was clear that the day's events had shifted perceptions. The woman stayed for a moment, gathering her things slowly. She walked to the exit with a sense of calm she had not felt in years. The air outside the courtroom felt lighter. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. She realized that her story, once hidden behind silence, had finally been heard in a meaningful way. The man followed, not immediately next to her but close enough. There was no confrontation, no last-minute argument, only a quiet understanding that things had changed. He knew that he had learned more from listening than from defending. Outside, the hallway seemed wider, brighter. She thought about the journey that had led her here. The years of careful silence, the moments of misunderstanding, the times when words were not enough. She felt a sense of dignity and self-respect that had been absent before. She understood that speaking does not erase the past, but it shapes how the past is understood. She realized that silence, once protective, had been transformed into clarity by courage and attention. The truth had emerged, not loud or dramatic, but real and undeniable. The man paused briefly before leaving. He looked back at the courtroom once more. He had expected a battle but found instead a lesson. He carried with him a newfound respect for the power of listening and the weight of unspoken words. The woman stepped into the sunlight outside. She did not look back. She felt free, not because the past was perfect or fully resolved, but because she had been recognized. Her silence had no longer defined her. Her words had. As she walked away, she felt a quiet strength. Years of careful observation, patience, and endurance had led to this moment. Her story had been heard. Her truth had been acknowledged. And the unexpected question that had finally asked for her perspective had changed everything. In the end, the courtroom was emptying, but the lesson lingered. Understanding requires more than listening to words. It requires attention, patience, and willingness to see the story beneath the silence. And sometimes, a single, unexpected question can bring that story to light in ways no one imagined. The woman walked into the day beyond the courtroom with a new awareness. That truth does not always arrive loudly, but when it does, it transforms not only the listeners, but the one who finally speaks.